when we're dealing with osmosis, we're dealing with a form of diffusion. And remember, diffusion is when something goes from high to low without any necessary energy, any extra energy. Now, osmosis is the diffusion of water. Both osmosis and diffusion are processes that do not require energy. And they always move from high to low. It's one of those fundamental concepts in science, all right? Things are moving from high to low. High what? High concentration. So anytime you have more stuff on one side, it'll move towards a space where there's less of this same material. And so that's the key idea here, that first of all, both diffusion and osmosis are occurring where you have a concentration gradient, where you have one side is high and the other side is low. And then on top of that, this is happening only with the energy that already exists in the system. No extra energy is necessary. Now, when we're talking about osmosis, it only occurs when something can't pass through a semi-permeable membrane. What that means is that whenever you have a membrane that allows some things through and not others, a semi-permeable membrane, like the plasma membrane or any one of the membranes in the cell, then you can have osmosis occur. So you need to have a membrane that allows water through, for instance, which is the movement of water, is osmosis. And it has to not, other things can't be allowed through. So let's take a look at an example. As you look here, you see that the sodium on this side, all these little black dots, are a lot. And here on this side, there's less of them. You could possibly begin to understand that we're talking about high concentrations over here and lower concentrations on this side, which would, if we listened and understood what was said earlier, would mean that the salt or the sodium would move from higher concentration here to a lower concentration on this side. Since there's more sodium up here than there is down below. That would make sense, except that this is a semi-permeable membrane, and this membrane does not allow salt through, so anything charged does not go through. That goes back to all that work we did with nonpolar and polar substances, and we know that this inside the membrane are lipids, and these lipids are nonpolar. They don't allow anything charged through. But water is not charged. It's polar and it's small, so it actually is allowed to and is able to go through this membrane from this space to this space if necessary, or vice versa. Now here we have the two conditions that are necessary for osmosis to occur. You have a high concentration on one side and a low concentration on the other, so you have a concentration gradient. You have a membrane that does not allow everything through. It doesn't allow sodium through. So once you have something that's not allowed through the membrane, you have a high concentration gradient. And there's water, and water can pass through, so the membrane is semi-permeable. It's not a plastic bag that doesn't allow anything through. No, that's not what this is. This is a membrane that allows some things through and not others. In this case, anything that's nonpolar, like oxygen gas or carbon dioxide gas, can easily pass through this membrane, diffuse, if you will. And this water can also move through the membrane. The movement of this water, the diffusion of this water, is called osmosis. So now let's think about this. The water will move from where its concentration is highest to where its concentration is lowest. So that's not the same as the concentration of sodium. So let's think about it for a moment and say, what if we took this side of the membrane and divided it, or said that there's something that will say all the stuff that's on this side of the membrane, we'll say it's 100%, 100%, whatever it is, whatever the volume is 100%. If the sodium is on this side high, so let's say it's 80% sodium on this side. It's a lot. What percent solvent is it? The solute, the sodium is the solute, right? The stuff that's dissolved. What percent water is on this side of the membrane? What percent water would be on this side of the membrane if it's 80% sodium? Well, if it's 80% sodium, we would have to say it's 20% water, right? 20% H2O. If it's the total is 100% and 80% is sodium, then 20% is water. Okay. I think that's understandable. I hope you understand what I'm saying. This side is 100% everything. If 80% is sodium, then 20% has to be water. This is a solute. This is a solvent, right? It's very, very, very high concentration of salt on this side. On this side of the membrane, it's much lower. So let's say it's 80% water. And therefore 20% sodium. Well, if that's true, we have a concentration gradient. 80% water on this side, 20% water on this side. Water would move from its high to its low. So water is going to move from its high to its low, and therefore is going to move out of this cell. This membrane would continue around, and this would be a cell. So the water would move out. If this side is out and this side is in, then water would move from inside to outside, because water's concentration is higher inside than it is outside. Everything, as we said in the beginning, moves from inside, from high to low. And yes, the outside is higher solute. That's true. This is a higher concentration of solute. And over here is a lower concentration. Inside is a lower concentration of solute. But the water concentration is higher inside than it is outside. Therefore, the water moves out. Let's take a look at another example. And let's try to simplify it. Now that we understand what drives the water, what moves the water. By the way, I explained this to you in class, but I'll say it again. All this movement is just random movement. And it's just about averaging out where these molecules are going to go. Also, remember that there's movement in both directions. And so you have movement out, but you also have some movement in. It's just the movement in is smaller than the amount of movement out. So you have a net movement. Net, meaning after you add and subtract, the resultant movement is mostly out. So most of the movement's out towards the lower concentration of water. So let's go ahead and take a look at it and just simplify it. Let's just simplify it and look and then try to follow a rule and see if we can apply it to some questions. there's a rule. It's a simplified rule. Let's just go ahead and say it. Osmosis is going to happen when, as we said earlier, something can't move across a semi-permeable membrane and water can. Then water will move to equal out the concentration. Therefore, water will move to where the solute concentration is greater. So again, water will diffuse when something can't pass a semi-permeable membrane and other things can. Water will move to where the solute concentration is greater. So if there's, we're assuming that everything in a living system, the solvent is water. So here we have 20% sodium. Therefore, you can think of it later, but 80% water. And here we have 30% sodium. Therefore, 7% water. But whatever. Let's just remember that water is going to move. If water is going to move, if sodium cannot move, then water is going to move to the area of greater solute concentration. And if we take a look at where the solute concentration is highest, that's over here. This is where it's highest. Therefore, water's going to move in that direction. And it's going to, if this were a cell, the cell would swell up. If this was inside and this was out, then the cell would swell up, because the water is moving to the area where there's a higher concentration and it's going to fill it up. That's it. So let's try to apply some of these problems. Let's try to apply these principles to some problems. You got these problems as a practice test while I was absent. Unfortunately, there were some reports of cheating, so we're not going to count the tests. And I apologize for those of you that didn't cheat, but I don't have the time to try to figure out who did or didn't. So let's try to use this as an opportunity. Let's twist this and try to make it into an opportunity, something positive, and use these problems as a practice problems and moving on. So it says inside one osmosis bag, and when they say osmosis bag, you have to think dialysis bag, or they'll use dialysis bag or osmosis bag. But when you see osmosis or dialysis bag, you have to think that water can pass through it. It's not a plastic bag. It seems like it's a plastic bag, but it's not. It's a bag that allows water through, but none of the charged particles. Glucose, for instance, wouldn't be allowed through. Inside one osmosis bag, there's osmosis bag A is a 50% glucose solution. So if it's a solution and it's 50% glucose, and we're talking about biology, the solvent is water. It could be something else in chemistry, but in biology, it's water. So 50% glucose means it's 50% water. Remember that. And bag B is 20% glucose solution. So then it says both bags are put into a container of 100% water. Now, I've said this before, and a lot of you, again, as always, want to do it your own way, which is fine as long as it works. But I always like to draw these out. Do it as you will, but I always like to draw them out, and I would suggest strongly that you do so. So these two bags are put into 100% water. So it's about the perfect hypotonic solution. Now remember when we talked about tonicity. Tonicity is when you have hyper or hypo, and hyper means a hypertonic solution is when you have a high solute concentration. And a hypo means a low solute concentration. Let's remember that. Let's keep that in mind. Hypo means low. Okay, and when we take a look at what's inside, we know that this is 50% here, and this is 20% here. Where outside it's 100% water. Here it's 50% water, but 50% solute, and here's 20%. Well, in both cases, 50 and 100. Right, 50 and 100. If outside is 100% water, then what percent? And here, answer this in your own mind. What percent solute do you have in the water? Think for a second. If it's 100% water, Oh my goodness, I hope everyone that's trying to think this through is screaming out the answer that it's 0% then. 0% solute. It has to be 0% solute if the outside's 100% water. Then it has to be 0% solute. So if it's 0% solute, in which direction is the water going to go for both of these? Well, water's going to go in to fill in where there's a higher solute concentration, both of these. If this had 1%, it would still be higher than outside. Water would still rush in, and both would gain weight. So your answer for this is both bags will gain weight, which is C. The next question is, when you have a 2%, for number 2, when you have a 0.9% NaCl solution. Okay, you have a 0.9 NaCl solution, and it is isotonic into red blood cells. As soon as they give you that information, as soon as you get that information that it's isotonic, there's something you should just automatically know at some point, and that's that this 0.9% something says it's isotonic. That means the red blood cells are equal to the 0.9. So it means the red blood cells are equal to the 0.9 NaCl. How do I know that? Because isotonic is one of those vocabulary words that you should have already put in on index cards and try to memorize. Hypertonic high, hypotonic low, isotonic equal. So if these two are isotonic to one another, then they're equal to one another. So this is 0.9, and this is 0.9. And then it says, which of these describes the results if red blood cells are placed in 9% sodium chloride solution? Again, I know some of you say that you know it, you don't have to do it on paper, but so often you make mistakes that way. I know I would. If this is a 9% solution, and inside a little baggie or in the red blood cell, either way, it doesn't matter. You have a 0.9% solution. And again, it's a semi-permeable membrane because it's a plasma membrane, and plasma membranes are semi-permeable membranes. They allow water through, but not the salt, not Na or Cl. Then in which way is it going to go? Water's going to flow to where the concentration is highest. So, that simplified rule that we just looked at a little while ago. So the flow of water is going to be from inside the cell out. So the water is going to flow out. What's going to happen to the poor little cell? Well, it's going to lose weight, or if you want to say shrink, you want to say shrivel. Plasmolysis is another word for the death of a cell because it's shrunk. So when we're dealing with this, they'll shrink. What's going to happen to the red blood cells is they're going to shrink. All right. So that's what's going to happen there. And each of these questions is going to be the same over and over again. So it's an interesting little experiment here. If you have the U-shaped tube. So here's water. Obviously, water is a solution. And on this side, you have 6% starch. This is 10% starch. And this membrane allows water through, but not starch. Now, remember, I've said this a few times now. You have to keep thinking, keep trying to work it out. If you have a 10% starch solution here, 10% starch, what percent water is it over here? I hope you said it's 90% water, right, over here on this side. And if it's 6% starch over here, then it's 94% water on this side. And so that, keeping that in mind, it always helps to remember where the water is the highest and the solute is the highest. Remember, this is a solute, and this would be the solvent. Solute and solvent. Together they equal 100%. Together they equal 100% on each side of the membrane. Wherever that membrane is if it's in a tube or if it's in a cell or if it's in a bucket, it doesn't matter. It's your hand, your finger, just the conditions don't matter. Well, they do, but what matters is that it's a semi-permeable membrane. When it comes to osmosis, that something can't pass through, like starch cannot go through, and that water is going to move in one direction or the other. Just like the practice problems I gave you on the PowerPoint, just like these problems are exactly the same. Very simple, very straightforward. Which of the following will occur? Water will move from the right to the left. Well, first let's think about it. Before we even start trying to choose, my suggestion is that you figure out which way water is going to move. All right? If it's going to move anywhere. Well, if this side is 10% starch, and this side, now you could try to figure out where the water is the highest. Water's highest here. So you can try to figure this out in two different ways. What a lot of kids think is more difficult, though some kids think is easier, is that 94% high is going to move towards the 90%, which is low. You can think of it that way. It means the arrow would come to this direction. The arrowhead would be pointing in this direction. Or you can think of it in the simplified format that I asked you to think about a moment ago, which is water is going to move to the area where the concentration is highest. And the concentration of solute is highest on here. It's 10%. It's higher than 6. I hope everyone sees that. And so water would move in this direction. Yay. So water will move to the right. So water will move to the right, from the right to the left. Well, you know that's not the answer because we just said it would move from the left to the right, right? Water will move from the left to the right. There's your answer. Starch will move. We know starch won't move because it said it was impermeable to starch. Impermeable means not permeable. Remember, the IM is a prefix that means not. Starch will move. We know starch won't move, so these C and D are wrong, and nothing will happen that's wrong, and we can move on now. Notice I've checked my answers. I've written on my paper. I know what's on my scratch paper, whatever I'm allowed to write on, and I made sure that each and every word I identified the impermeable part. So I know starch is not permeable. I know that this is a semi-permeable membrane. I know where water is the highest, where it's the lowest. I know where the solute is the highest, the solute is the lowest. I identified in which direction water is moving. Then I went through and chose the right answer and canceled out the others. That's how you do each of these problems and maximize your chances of getting it right on the end of your exam. So let's move on to another example. So that's it for the first page of that practice. So, and this is just going to, it's just going to repeat itself over and over again, but we'll go ahead and do a few more of these. And then I'll let you figure out the last few. All right. Walway is a general herbicide for aquatic plants. It is effective against freshwater but not saltwater plants. It works by breaking down the cell walls of the plants. A freshwater plant dies because their cells. So what happens when the freshwater is herbicide, right? What happens when it works well in the cell walls and the freshwater plant dies because their cells do what? Well, this goes to what is the function of a cell wall in a cell. We studied that a plant does have a cell wall. So here's a cell wall of a plant, right? And inside the cell wall there's this plasma membrane. And then as part of the cell. So the cell actually exists inside the cell wall. The cell wall is produced by the plant cell. So the cell membrane is complete. It's a bad drawing, but there's a nucleus in there, and there's this central vacuole, and all the little organelles and little things here. And looks like a person, but whatever. So there's the cell membrane. There's the cell wall. Why does a plant cell? Why does a bacterial cell? Why does a prokaryote? Why do these things need cell walls? Not all prokaryotes have cell walls, but why do these things need cell walls? And they need cell walls because if water rushes in, and this water rushes in, this thing is going to start to swell. What the cell wall will help it do is not burst. All right. So if you get rid of the cell wall and the freshwater plant starts to gain water, the cells will start to burst. So when we're looking at shrink and cease to function, well, the cell wall is not going to stop the cell from shrinking. The cell wall is only going to stop things from bursting out. If you think about it, it makes sense. If you remain the same size but malfunction, that doesn't make any sense because the cell wall is just simply structural. It just sits there. It doesn't actually, it allows things through, has pores, but it doesn't do anything. It's made of cellulose. It's the wood that we sit on. So remain the same size but malfunction doesn't make sense. Shrink and cease to function doesn't make sense because the cell wall is not going to stop the cell from shrinking. It's crushed by the weight of the plant. That doesn't make sense either. And, well, I guess it might to some. Well, it's wrong. And swell and burst is the answer. The freshwater cell dies because their cells swell and burst. Without the help of the cell wall, the freshwater plants cannot stop the cell from swelling and bursting. The next question. The red blood cell has salt concentration of 0.9. Happens if it's placed in a 0.8 salt solution. The red blood cell will, well, again, I'm going to tell you, and you're not, if some of you will listen, I hope everyone will, draw it out. So there's your 0.8 solution. So this is 0.8% salt. Let's just put Na, although it could be any salt, but let's put Na. And this red blood cell is 0.9. We already identified that from the previous. But let's put the red blood cell in there, and let's say that's 0.9%. What's that going to happen in this red blood cell? Is the water going to rush in, or is the water going to rush out? That's really the question. Think about it. So it's 0.9 in here. It's 0.9 in here, and it's 0.8 in here. Water's going to move using the short version, the short and simple version. Water's going to move to where the salt concentration, the solute, because it could be sugar, it could be some other solute. The solute concentration is the highest. It's higher inside than it is outside. So I hope everyone that's been trying to do these, everyone says that, understands that water's going to go from here to here. So what's going to happen in that cell is water rushes in. It's tied to number 4, isn't it? It's pretty much why number 4 works, why Wallway works, right? So the water's rushing in because it's higher concentration of salt inside. So it's not going to shrink. So shrinking is out of the question. It doesn't make sense. So why would something shrink as you keep filling it up with more and more stuff? In this case, it's water, but so it's not that. Shrink if its membrane is impermeable to salt. No, it wouldn't shrink. In fact, if it is impermeable to salt, and it does allow water through, so that is the situation. It's not shrinking at all. Maintain its shape and nothing will happen. We know that's not true because it's not isotonic. That only happens when it's isotonic. Swell and probably burst because its membrane is impermeable to salt, impermeable to water. Swell and probably burst because its membrane is impermeable to water. If it were impermeable to water, then it wouldn't swell because water would never go in. Salt would just transfer over. But we know that this is not true. So that only leaves us with one possible answer, and that's letter D. And the next question, it says 2 beakers are connected by a tube. There's the tube. There's a membrane. But water is to put water, but not a protein. Wait a minute. So let me reread that. Are connected by a tube, partitioned by a membrane, permeable to water, but not to protein. So there's protein in here. Now we're not even dealing with glucose or sucrose or salt. We're dealing with a protein. The protein cannot go through. So something can't go through the membrane, but water can. That is the essential requirement for osmosis to occur, for water to move. When one of the following statements, which one of the following statements describes what will happen to this system? So 2% here, 4% here. back to our little rule of thumb. In which one is the solute concentration the highest? In this case, it's a protein, but it's still solute, and here is where the solute concentration is higher, in B. So water is going to do what? Well, I hope you said water is going to move from A to B. Come on, guys. You know this. From 2 to 4%, because this is the place of higher concentration of solute. That's where water is going to flow. Water will only move from A to B. This is the word only. This is the trick. All right. We know that water is moving in both directions. Said that before. Water is moving in both directions, but the net movement's to the right, to B. There's water moving in this direction too. It's just not moving as much in this direction to the left into A as much as it is moving into B, because it's all random, and we're not going to go back into that. But just know that it's always moving both directions. Always. Even when they're at equilibrium, they're always moving in both directions. So water is only moving from A to B? No, that is not correct. So make sure you don't put that only. If they put only, if they say net or water does move in this direction, then you can put yes. But if they use the word only, you might as well just mark it wrong, because only is not true. Water only will move equally in both directions, so that there will be no net change in the system. That only happens at equilibrium. This is not an equilibrium. This is at 4%. This is at 2%. They're not equal. When they are equal, when these two sides are equal, then there'll be water moving in both directions equally. That would be true, but this is not the case now, so this is not true. Water will move in both directions, but the net flow will be from A to B. That is correct. That is the answer to our problem. It is D. Water is moving in both directions, as you see here, but the bigger arrow shows you that there's more water moving into B. That's correct. Let's check the last answer just to make sure. Water will move in both directions, but the net flow will be from B to A. That's not true. We already identified that wasn't true. So, again, almost looks like an American flag here. Cute. It's D is the only answer that makes any sense. So the last question of the day is the solutions in the 4 artificial cells that you see here drawn. Here's cell 1, 2, 3, and 4. Notice that the percent solution is 5%, 10%, 1%, and it looks like 15%. So 5, 10, 1, and 15. This is the level of the solutions. So this is the level of the water, if you will. The solution being the solvent being water. They're differentially permeable is another way of saying semi-permeable. Okay. Differentially means just it's choosy and what it lets through. Sucrose will not go through, right? But let's go ahead and read it and make sure. The solutions in the 4 artificial cells that diagrammed below are separated from each other by stationary, meaning they're not moving. Differentially permeable, meaning semi-permeable, or won't allow some things through but will allow other things through. The membranes are permeable only to water, so water does move through, but that's all that goes through. So sucrose won't be able to get through. As the experiment progresses, which of the following is true about the amount of sucrose in the cells? So this is a trick question. So if we were trying to figure out what would happen to the water level, we would say, well, this is a higher concentration, so water from this one is going to flow into this cell. So cell 1, water will flow into cell 2. Cell 3, water will flow into cell 2 and cell 4. All right, so water is going to move in this direction and this direction. So that's what we would say if they were asking about water, if they were asking what would swell or what would shrink. But that's not what they're asking. They're asking about the amount of sucrose. That doesn't change in the cells. It stays the same. It never changes because they can't move past the membranes. They tricked us, or they try to trick us. The sucrose cannot move past this membrane, so it can't change. The water will. So what does change if the amount of sucrose doesn't? It's the concentration that changes. That's key, that the concentration changes. The amount of solute doesn't change, but the amount of solvent does. And for each of the cells, and the water again would move from this area to that area, and from this area to this area and that area, and of course it would move vice versa as well, but just in smaller amounts, so that what would end up happening is at some point all the cells would have equal amounts of concentration, the same concentration. So the solvent would move until all of them had an equal concentration. But the amount of solute does not change. Trick question. All right. The answer's over here, so you can check them. Well, that's it. I hope that helped. The other exam we'll talk about in class, and we'll grade, and we're going to move on. This is the last real section. We're going to then talk about active transport real quick, and what is pinocytosis exactly, and exocytosis. Make sure we understand that. You should hopefully have gained that, but we'll double check and make sure everybody understands that. And if those questions were a problem for you on the test, we can throw those questions out, or just throw the exam out and give you shorter exams. Include those questions in the next exam that we're going to have. Then we're going to go ahead and hit every one of the learning objectives that have to do with your end of course exam. All right, well, you have a great day, have a great weekend. I hope this helps, and I'll see you on Monday. This is not due on Monday. I want to make sure everyone understands this is not due on Monday. I hope you listen to it before then, but if you don't, it's not important. What is important is that you watch it and learn it, and if you don't even watch it, that's fine too, since this is just supplemental. It's just meant to help you learn. All right, have a great day.